Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the heart of psychosocial health and aging.
That's right.
We're tackling that key chapter on roles and relationships. The things that really define who we are. We'll break down how social identity shifts as people get older, and crucially, what nurses need to do when those shifts cause significant loss.
It's all about agency and status, really. You can't talk about aging well without understanding identity. So, a role.
Mm,
It's just a socially accepted way we behave to show who we are, like mother or mechanic or volunteer.
got it. And a relationship.
That's the connection that forms when people interact in those roles. Think parent-child, husband-wife, nurse-patient. They're dynamic.
And the evidence is just crystal clear. Having strong, positive social connections isn't just nice, it actually improves quality of life directly.
Definitely. But how those roles are understood isn't universal. Society kind of dictates their value.
Right, which brings us to the idea of societal types. Yeah.
Exactly. In what's called a homogeneous society, role expectations are pretty simple, widely shared, not much conflict there.
But that's not us.
No. We're in a heterogeneous society, like modern America. Lots of different subcultures mixing. And that means your background, race, religion, age, ethnicity really shapes how you see roles,
Which inevitably leads to friction or misunderstanding.
for sure. And this creates potential for conflict, especially in diverse settings like healthcare.
Can you give an example of that kind of conflict?
Well, think about filial piety. It's a really strong value in many Asian and Pacific Islander cultures. It means essentially deep respect, obedience, and devotion to your parents. Often, it translates into adult children providing direct, hands-on care for aging parents.
Okay, a powerful expectation.
Extremely. But then you have younger family members, perhaps more Americanized, maybe living a more individualistic lifestyle. They could face huge internal conflict, immense guilt, trying to meet that traditional role expectation.
And that guilt,
Uh,
it affects care, right?
Absolutely. It often stops them from seeking help they desperately need, like respite care or formal home care services. They might even resist professional help when it's offered.
Because accepting help feels like they're failing in that role.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The healthcare system, instead of being a support, can feel like an accusation.
Which can lead straight to caregiver burnout and care crises down the line because intervention was delayed.
Exactly. And this connects directly to the predictable changes, the sort of unavoidable losses in roles and relationships that happen with aging. They challenge that sense of identity, that agency we talked about.
Okay, let's talk about those losses. The chapter makes a really strong point. The longer you've had a role, the more it's part of you, and the tougher the adjustment when it's gone. And here's something that really stood out. The grief you feel over losing a role or losing status. It can be just as bad, maybe even worse, than grieving a person.
That's a critical insight. And often, the first big role change people face is losing their occupational role, retirement.
Yeah, your identity gets so wrapped up in what you do for a living.
Right, so when retirement hits, even if it's planned, there's grief. Grief for the loss of status, the daily structure, the easy social contact at work. People can resent feeling, well, unproductive.
But we see baby boomers changing the game, right? Working longer, starting new ventures, even dating online. So is it still accurate to see losing work as this universal trauma? Or is that idea maybe a bit dated now?
That's a really good question. We do have to differentiate, I think. Is it a forced retirement or a lack of meaningful engagement versus, say, a voluntary transition where someone has financial security and other interests?
Okay.
The research shows better adjustment for those with resources and other roles, maybe volunteering or entrepreneurship. But for people pushed out or those who can't find new purpose, yeah, that status loss is still incredibly traumatic.
Makes sense. Okay, shifting to the family unit. Losing a spouse after decades together.
Yeah.
It's profoundly traumatic.
Oh, absolutely. You lose that primary intimate relationship. It often triggers severe grief, emotional distress, and deep social isolation. You've lost the person who knew your whole shared story.
Then there's the parent role. That gets complicated too.
Very. Parents are usually the ones in charge, independent. But when they start losing that independence, maybe become dependent on their adult kids, conflict is almost guaranteed.
That role reversal, the child becoming the parent's caregiver.
It's a huge source of stress. It can really disrupt established ways of relating and communicating within the family.
On the flip side, the grandparent role often seems more positive.
Yes, generally it's described as more pleasant. You get to share wisdom, experiences, maybe spoil the grandkids a bit. but without the day-to-day discipline burden.
Still a vital connection, though.
Very important. But it's vulnerable, Geographic distance, family issues like divorce, they can disrupt that bond.
And there are other losses compounding things, too.
Definitely. Losing friends as they move away or pass away shrinks the social circle, leading to isolation.
And moving. Downsizing, having to get rid of possessions collected over a lifetime.
That's incredibly painful. Feels like giving away pieces of their life story, their memories.
I can only imagine, like watching your personal history get dismantled.
Yeah. And then arguably the toughest losses because they hit right at the core of a person's agency.
Loss of health, loss of independence.
Exactly. These change everything. They make people dependent, strip away their control over their own lives, their own destiny. It's fundamentally altering.
So all these losses, status, agency, independence, they force this huge psychological adjustment. And that adjustment, that response, is what we call grief.
Right. Grief is that powerful, natural mix of sorrow, loss, confusion you feel when you lose something important, a person, a role, your health, your independence.
And there's a typical pattern, though. It's not always neat stages.
No, the phases often overlap. But generally, first you see shock and numbness, maybe for the first couple of weeks. Disbelief, maybe sudden crying, feeling kind of stunned, trouble making simple decisions.
Okay, initial shock.
Then comes searching and yearning. This can last quite a while, maybe up to 4 months. This is where you see despair, maybe apathy, restlessness, anger sometimes. People might withdraw socially. They're kind of searching for what's lost, which can mess with memory and concentration too.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. Following that is disorientation, say from month 4 to month 7. This often involves deeper depression, maybe guilt. People might really resist help or even acknowledging the loss fully during this phase.
And the goal phase
is reorganization. This takes time, could be up to 18, even 24 months. But gradually you see a sense of release. Energy starts returning, judgment improves. They start thinking about new goals, maybe getting back into routines like regular eating and sleeping.
But sometimes grief gets stuck. It becomes complex grief.
Yes, and that's a real clinical concern. So when that grieving period is way longer or much more intense than usual, and it actually stops the person from functioning.
How does that look?
You might see complete detachment, just ongoing severe sadness or anger. And crucially, a failure to manage basic activities of daily living ADLs, like bathing, dressing, eating.
So what are the nursing goals when faced with complex grief?
They sound simple, but they're huge. Get the patient to verbalize their grief. Help them connect with and use support systems. And, critically, help them participate in their ADLs again.
And where do you start?
It absolutely has to start with building a trusting relationship.
Which you can't fake or rush.
No way. It takes time, really listening, being consistent, being honest, showing respect. You have to earn that trust before you can really help.
Okay, trust first, then what?
Then you need to assess the source and acknowledge the reality of the grief. You create a safe space, non-judgmental, where they can actually talk about the loss, confront it. If they avoid it, it just stays stuck.
Makes sense. And step 3, encouraging participation in ADLs. Why ADLs specifically? Is it just about keeping busy?
It's more about structure and regaining control. Someone in complex grief feels lost, overwhelmed. Successfully doing these basic, predictable tasks, shaving, getting dressed, managing hygiene, it gives back small, real bits of self-efficacy. It's a tangible way to regain some control over their immediate world.
Ah, I see. It's about rebuilding that sense of capability.
Exactly. And finally, with grief, you always need to identify external sources of support. Family, friends, clergy, support groups, whatever resources they have or could connect with.
Got it. Okay, let's move on to something related. Loneliness and social isolation. They often go hand in hand with grief and loss.
They do. And they affect a lot of older adults. It's important to distinguish them slightly. Loneliness is that feeling of being alone, that painful sense. Social isolation is the objective state of being separated from others, lacking social interaction.
And isolation can happen for different reasons.
Right. We talk about unintentional isolation. This is caused by external factors. Maybe their spouse and friends have died, family moved away, they can't get around easily anymore due to health issues, or they lack money for transport or even clothes to go out.
Things outside their control, essentially.
Yeah. Then there's intentional isolation. This usually comes from internal barriers. Maybe they're afraid people won't accept them, or they're just too overwhelmed by grief to face people. Or perhaps body image changes, like after surgery for an amputation or a colostomy, make them self-conscious. Cognitive issues can also make socializing tiring or confusing.
So what clues should you look for when assessing for risk?
You look for someone spending a lot of time alone, obviously. Withdrawal from usual activities. Maybe they express anger or seem depressed. Changes in sleep patterns, appetite, or concentration are big red flags. And sometimes they'll just tell you they're worried about losses or feeling lonely. Oh, and don't forget that link between loneliness and poor nutrition. It's a real risk.
Okay, so interventions, what are the goals?
We want to help them increase their social participation, identify ways to reduce the isolation, and maintain healthy eating.
How do we start?
First, really assess the specific reasons for their isolation. Is it physical, financial, emotional, psychological? The approach needs to match the cause.
Tailored care. Makes sense.
Then, actively promote social contact and interaction. I think broadly here. It's not just about group activities, which some people hate. Encourage phone calls, writing letters, maybe using email or social media if they're open to it.
And make it accessible.
Crucial. Ensure phones have amplifiers if needed, or computer screens have larger text. Remove those practical barriers.
What about those who really resist groups or reaching out?
That's where the third intervention is key.
Yeah.
Spend one-on-one time with the lonely person. Even brief, regular visits from a nurse or caregiver can provide vital human contact. It can be a bridge, a gentle way to maybe encourage more social engagement later.
That personal connection matters. Okay, one more major area. Altered family functioning. This seems most common when an older family member becomes dependent.
Yes, that role reversal we talked about earlier often triggers this. The dynamics shift dramatically.
And the assessment cues. Similar to grief.
Pretty similar, yeah. You're listening for voice concerns from the patient or family, observing their interactions for signs of stress or conflict, looking for confusion about the new roles.
So the nursing goals are about helping everyone adjust.
Essentially, yes. Help all family members express their feelings about the changes and then work with them to develop coping strategies that actually work for their situation.
What are the key interventions here?
Start by carefully assessing family interactions. Watch for destructive patterns, constant anger, obvious frustration. If things get too tense during a visit, maybe suggest taking a short break, letting everyone cool off.
Good point. And then?
This one is critical. Encourage private verbalization of feelings for everyone involved, including the caregivers.
Meaning not in front of the patient.
Exactly. Think about it. How can an adult child honestly express their frustration, maybe even anger, about their parent's dependency while the parent is right there? It's almost impossible. They need a safe, confidential space away from the patient to process those difficult negative emotions without feeling guilty or ashamed.
That's a really important practical point for nurses. What else?
Try to assist families in identifying their strengths. What holds them together? Is it love, shared values, a sense of duty, humor? Tapping into those existing strengths provides a foundation for coping and fixing strain dynamics.
Focus on the positive.
Right. Also, actively encourage family visits and make them feel welcome. Simple things, offering coffee, using names, show the staff values their presence and their role in the patient's life.
Makes them feel like partners in care.
Precisely. And related to that, encourage family members to assist in simple care tasks if they're willing. Things like helping with shaving or doing hair. It's not about them doing the nursing work, but it's a concrete way for them to show affection and concern, to feel connected.
Without pressure, though.
Absolutely no pressure. Just an open invitation.
Yeah.
You also need to identify factors that might be interfering with positive interactions. Maybe medication side effects are causing confusion, or there are financial worries, or the caregiver is ill themselves.
And if the family's needs are just too complex,
then it's time to explore community resources. Social workers, family counseling services, support groups, maybe specialized geriatric mental health clinics. Nurses need to recognize when the situation requires more support than the immediate care team can provide alone.
That makes sense. Know your limits and connect them to help.
Exactly. So that really covers the core of roles and relationships. We've defined those key terms, walked through the major losses aging can bring: job, spouse, health, independence, and really importantly, outline those specific nursing actions for complex grief, isolation, and family difficulties, always coming back to building trust and restoring agency.
It really highlights a central tension, doesn't it? Society often views older adults through a lens of loss, what they can't do anymore. Helpless, useless sometimes.
The ageist stereotypes.
But the reality, especially with generations like the baby boomers, shows people are actively fighting that narrative, redefining what aging looks like.
Yeah.
The struggle for agency doesn't stop.
It certainly doesn't. So maybe something for you, the listener, to think about as you apply this. How can we, in our care planning, fundamentally shift the focus? How do we consistently emphasize the remaining roles, the existing capabilities of older adults, instead of primarily framing them by the roles and abilities they've lost?
That's a powerful question to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the psychosocial world of geriatric nursing. Take this knowledge, apply it, and we hope to have you with us again next time.